Yesterday, on the 17th of November 2025, the United Nations Security Council passed Security Council Resolution 2803, purporting to authorize a 2-year trusteeship over Gaza. Today, I will explain how this shameful act follows a long tradition in international diplomacy. The concept of trusteeship over people was adopted by Europeans for colonial rule over Africa at the Berlin Conference in the late 19th century, by the League of Nations after the First World War for the Mandate territories, including the Mandate here in Palestine, and by the United Nations after the Second World War for the Trust territories and all other non-settler colonies. Trusteeship assumes a world divided between supposedly childlike people incapable of looking after themselves, a characterization now shamefully applied to the Palestinian people of Gaza, and the supposed adults. Yes, Donald Trump, Tony Blair, and others, who are deemed able to rule not only over their own people, but also others. Falling into the supposed child category is the rationale for requiring trusteeship. In the League of Nations Covenant, the people of the mandates were, and I quote, not yet able to stand by themselves under the strenuous conditions of the modern world, end of quote. The child-adult relationship is the rationale for the duty of care. The adult is in charge, but must act in the interest of the ward. The adult's responsibility is to bring up the child so it will eventually attain maturity, to carry out tutelage, enabling development. The Gaza trusteeship will thus be temporary because it is transitional. The adults will build up local capacities for self-administration. The children will consequently mature and attain adulthood, and the need for trusteeship will then end. At the heart of this model is racism. In the colonial era, a racist global standard of civilization, adopted within a system dominated by Europeans, determined who the adults and the children were. No prizes for guessing who conceived themselves as the adults. Trusteeship was a self-serving sham, invoked in bad faith, serving as an alibi to rationalize colonial rule, which could now be justified as a civilizing mission. But the consequence of colonial liberation struggles after the Second World War, the end of formal colonization for non-settler colonies, was the adoption in international law of the right of self-determination. This was a repudiation of trusteeship. There were to be no more childlike and adult-like people in the world. The racist child-adult distinction between peoples was supposedly abolished. All peoples were equal and deserved freedom as adults. As the United Nations General Assembly stated 65 years ago next month, on the 14th of December 1960, and I quote again, inadequacy of political, economic, social, or educational preparedness should never serve as a pretext for delaying independence, end of quote. Despite this, trusteeships continued, mostly conducted by international organizations, as in Bosnia and East Timor. Global human rights rules were invoked as seemingly non-racist standard of civilization that could determine supposedly legitimately, where trusteeship was needed. International organizations were seen as capable of acting selflessly and thus performing the duty of trustee in good faith, in contrast to states. And temporary arrangements, when actually followed, were seen as supposedly genuine trusteeships, in that they didn't endlessly defer independence as the sham colonial versions had. I wrote a book on these arrangements and their antecedents in the colonial era. I am told that this is being used as the manual for the Gaza trusteeship. This horrifies me. At the ICJ advisory opinion case last year, I had the great privilege to represent the League of Arab States, and I argued, based on my academic research, that the Palestinian people had a legal entitlement to be free of the Israeli occupation without preconditions, simply because of their right, of your right to self-rule, not simply because you were being treated abusively. In its landmark ruling, the court agreed. This was a conclusion about the right to self-determination, pure and simple in and of itself. It would, therefore, apply equally to any form of foreign administration, however ostensibly humanitarian and time-limited. Replacing an abusive trustee with another form of trusteeship is not self-determination and would be illegal. We might be told that somehow this arrangement has been rendered lawful because the representatives of the Palestinian people, at least some of them, have somehow agreed to it. Just as supposedly Oslo legitimated the continuation of certain elements of the occupation, at least of parts of here in the West Bank. But agreements brought about through an unlawful use of force, as this one has been, and also contrary to peremptory or Jos Kogan's rules of international law, these are rules that cover fundamental subject matter, which for this reason cannot be limited by any other rules of international law, as this agreement, supposed agreement, has been, and the right of self-determination is a peremptory norm, such agreements are void. Again, as I had the privilege to argue for the League of Arab States before the ICJ and also the ICC last year, the best approach in situations like this is to say that such agreements may be enforced insofar as they're compatible with the peremptory legal rights of the Palestinian people. For example, if they provided for the resumption of urgently needed humanitarian aid in Gaza. But those provisions which are not, such as permitting the trusteeship, are void. We might also be told that these illegalities have been cured by the UN Security Council resolution that was passed yesterday, Resolution 2803. Indeed, the common description of that resolution is that it has legalized the trusteeship. The Council did, in the past, purport to provide legal authority for those other trusteeships in Bosnia and East Timor. The Security Council has the power in the UN Charter to provide legal authority for something that would otherwise be illegal, and for this to be binding on all member states of the UN who've accepted this by being part of the UN Charter. Palestine is not, of course, a UN member state, because indeed the Council itself cannot agree, because of the threat of the veto from the US, to admit it. Moreover, in any case, the Council's power is limited. It can only act in a way that's compatible with the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. Those purposes and principles stipulate that the adjustment or settlement of disputes must take place, and I quote, in conformity with the principles of justice and international law. As the trusteeship is not in conformity with the norm of self-determination, and this has peremptory status, purporting to authorize the trusteeship in doing that, the Council is acting beyond its lawful powers, ultra vires. As such, the authorization is void. This is the same problem the Palestinian people faced over a century ago, when the Council of the League of Nations, very roughly speaking the equivalent to the UN Security Council, purported to vary the provisions of Article 22 of the League Covenant, which stipulated that Palestine should be provisionally recognized as an independent state, to instead permit, supposedly, the UK to retain control as a trustee in order to implement the Balfour Declaration commitment to establishing a Jewish state here in Palestine. As I argued in my academic publications and before the ICJ last year for the Arab League, the Council acted ultra vires, and the authority it therefore attempted to give to the UK was void. Just as then, trusteeship is back here in Palestine, and again, with a British character to it in the form of Tony Blair, so too, again, the executive organ of the global organization is attempting to legalize this by acting beyond the limits of its constituent instrument. Truly, there is nothing new under the sun. I will end by quoting from the statement issued by the representatives of Hamas today in response to Security Council Resolution 2803, and I quote, "We call on the international community and the Security Council to uphold the international law and humanitarian values and to adopt resolutions that achieve justice for Gaza and the Palestinian cause through the actual cessation of the brutal genocidal war on Gaza, reconstruction, ending the occupation, and enabling our people to self-determination and establish their independent state with Jerusalem as its capital." End of quote. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph.